Explaining the Anglo-Zanzibar War. Zanzibar had been a part of Oman since they took it over from the Portuguese in the 17th century. However, in 1858, the Sultan of Oman, Syed bin Sultan, would die, and his realm would be divided amongst his sons. Majid Syed would take over Zanzibar. However, his rule was not constrained to the island of Zanzibar alone. As the center of the slave trade in Africa, Zanzibar had trading posts all across Africa, going as far as the central Congo. But when Bargash bin Syed became the Sultan of Zanzibar in 1870, European powers started to encroach on eastern Africa. For example, in 1873, a British adventuring consul named John Kirk was able to pressure the Sultan into abolishing slavery within Zanzibar. However, the trade would still continue. Plus, European slave traders would challenge the ones from Zanzibar inside of the Congo. In 1884, a man named Carl Peters would sign treaties with local tribes inside of Tanzania. These treaties would establish German East Africa. The Germans would anger the Sultan by forcing him to give land to them. However, like the Ashabari riots, the locals would rise up against them. However, unlike the Germans, British diplomats and traders would be able to establish good relations with the Sultan. Because of this, the Sultan would agree to give land to Sir William Mackinnon and the British East Africa Company. But when Leo von Caprini became Chancellor of Germany in 1890, he would settle land disputes between the British and the Germans during the Heligoland Zanzibar Treaty. From this, the Germans would gain the Heligoland and the Caprivi Strip. Meanwhile, Britain took Wituland, and Zanzibar became a British protectorate. Nevertheless, Zanzibar still had a lot of influence in East Africa. For instance, one Zanzibari trader, Tipu Tip, largely governed eastern Congo. But in 1892, he would go to war with the Congo Free State, largely pushing out Arab influence within Central Africa. Plus, any new sultan needed British approval before becoming the sultan. This would not be a problem when in 1893, pro-British Sultan Habib bin Thuani became sultan. However, when British troops moved into Zanzibar to crack down on slavery, there would be clashes with the locals. But when the Sultan would die in 1896, his nephew Khalid bin Bargash would move into the palace and would deem himself the new Sultan. This would be without any British approval. On August 25, 1896, the British diplomat in East Africa would demand that he step down. This would be ignored, however, and Bargash would begin to deploy troops around the palace. Of the 3,000 troops there, many of the weapons that they held were gifts to the previous sultans. There was also only one ship in the Zanzibar Navy, which happened to be a yacht. That yacht also happened to be a gift from Britain. The Zanzibar artillery included a Gatling gun, a 17th century cannon, and a couple of field guns that the Germans had given them. On the 26th, the British troops would gain authorization from the British to launch an attack. On the 27th, Bargash would be given an ultimatum, saying that if he didn't leave the palace by 9 a.m., he would be forced out. At 8 a.m., Bargash would refuse, and the British would respond by saying that they had no intention to fire upon the palace, but they would do so if needed. At 9 a.m., the British troops would get authorization from the British government to fire upon the palace. By 9:02, most of Zanzibar's artillery was destroyed, and the palace began to collapse. This would be happening while 3,000 Zanzibari troops were still inside the palace. By 9:40, the Sultanate's flag had been lowered, and all shelling had ceased, bringing the 38-minute conflict to an end. In conclusion, the Anglo-Zanzibar War was the shortest conflict in history, which ended in the deaths of only around 500 people. After 2 minutes of fighting, Bargash had fled to the German consulate, but he would later be found by the British and exiled to St. Helena, the same place that Napoleon was exiled to. Only one British sailor was wounded during the conflict, but he would make a full recovery in hospital. Thank you for watching this video on the Anglo-Zanzibar War.